Today we're going to build a 1966 TR6. As you can see, we're already pretty far along with everything that we need. After you've gotten everything back from your favorite machine shop, you are ready to assemble it. This part I consider fairly easy, and you should actually know how to do because you're going to have to work on these things if you ride them. One thing that can really make assembly easy is installing certain items before the case halves even go together, like the cam gears and your drive sprocket. One of the reasons I like to do this is because fourth gear can actually be really tight in its bearing. We're using one of Dan's transmission rebuild kits, and so it comes with two new bushings for fourth gear. I've already installed them and honed them to fit the main shaft. This is something you're going to want to have your machine shop take care of for you because fitment is very important. Something else I like to do is make sure that the sprocket fits over fourth gear. Sometimes these sprockets are a little bit snug and you have to do a little bit of work, maybe taking some burrs off or clearancing it slightly so they fit. When installing fourth gear into the case, if you do have to tap it in, just use the butt end of a dead blow or a wooden handle of a hammer. You don't want to get carried away, and you can usually hear when it hits the bottom. We've already verified that the sprocket fits over fourth gear nicely, so we know we can drop that on. Dan's transmission kit comes with a new tab washer, and so we're going to go ahead and use that. It's always a good idea to replace these. This is also something that sometimes requires a little bit of fitment, but other times we get lucky and they press right on quite nicely, like this one's going to. Because of the size of this nut and because this can be a little bit tricky, what I like to do is just get it snug right now, and then later on you can actually torque it. One way to hold one of these sprockets is a large set of vice grips. They fit nicely in between the teeth and you can't damage anything, and it gives you a good grip. The other thing you could do is wrap a chain around it, or if you have a large enough vise and you're careful, you could hold the sprocket. Later when we get this in my engine stand, we'll give this a good torquing. Something else that's easy to install at this point when the case halves are still apart is your cam and cam gear. I like to do this because it gives you a chance to hold the camshaft in a vise with some soft jaws, and then you have a lot more control over using your installer tools. It's important at these stages that we're using plenty of assembly lube. You can never really have too much, so always put generous amounts on any type of contact points. This is our exhaust cam, easily identified by the points end there. I've already installed the new kibble white bushings and reamed them. Sometimes the keys do require a little bit of finesse. I like to use like a stone or a high grit sandpaper, and you can remove very small amounts of material in case the key was not manufactured the correct width and you're having a hard time with it fitting. These actually fit really nicely. They're super snug. I can just barely get them in by hand. Sometimes you do have to just kind of pinch them down a little bit. I like to use like channel locks. You don't have to get too carried away. You don't want to mar up anything. One thing that you have to have during assembly is cam installation tools. You cannot use a hammer. That is a number one rule I like to say, is hammers are not optional. So you're going to take your outer, we're going to thread that on. Thankfully we have a cam gear with good threads. Sometimes these do get damaged because people like to use hammers, and unfortunately they are not fun to try and clean those threads up. The other side of the tool is going to thread left hand onto the cam itself. This one did require a little bit of clearancing, so do check to make sure it fits through the center of the gear. Once that's installed, you can now take your gear find your timing mark, and then know that that's the keyway you're going to use. So we're going to slide that down over and try and locate that key, install our nut, left hand thread. Now, for demonstration purposes, we're doing it here on the bench. It is very handy to utilize a vise to bite the lobes of the cam. What you can do is with soft jaws, you can pinch across this section, which will prevent the cam from rotating. But for demonstration purposes, we're just doing it right here. We're going to take our channel locks and hold the outer of the tool, and we're just going to nice and easy draw that cam gear onto the cam. If it fights you at all, if it stops, and if it feels like it's going to stop rotating, you're probably driving the key into the bushing. So you want to stop, try again, make sure that key is fully seated, because if this fights you at all, you need to stop and check. So now we can disassemble. It should go that smoothly. If you are experiencing any fight or struggle, stop, reassess, make sure all your components do fit. We're going to repeat the process over here on the intake cam. Now that our right side case is ready to go, we're going to switch over here to the left side, the drive side. I've already installed the outer race and the crank seal. Pretty much the only things we need to do on this side. I prefer to assemble crank halves with the drive side down. To make things easier, I prefer to use these aluminum I-beams. I'll lay my cases across. The crank for this engine has been ground to 30 thousandths under, fitted with these MAP steel H-beam rods, and balanced to 75%. I've already installed our drive side bearing, and this thing is ready to go. It's important to verify all of your threads are good, everything is clean, free of debris, anything that might be left over from the grind and balance, and verify that your sludge tube and plug have been installed correctly. I like to add a generous amount of assembly lube to the cam bushings now. I'm also going to add to the bearing rollers to make sure they're adequately lubricated as we assemble this. Now, my preferred method is to protect the rods with the webs of the crank, and then you can easily set your crank together. Once it's in, you can rotate to verify everything feels good and it clearances properly. We're going to continue to leave our rod protected by the webs like so, and as we assemble our case halves, we don't have to worry about bashing into anything and causing any damage. At this point, it is extremely important that you remember to put your breather disc and spring in your intake side cam. Be sure that it is fully seated and it freely spins. If there's any catching, please file corners or do whatever you need to make sure that this breather disc is free and can move. Make sure your spring falls in and is seated fully, as once your cam goes in there, you will have no room for error. At this point of assembly, we need this timing side bearing to slip over our crank with ease. We also need to seal our case halves together. What I prefer to do is I'll warm up this aluminum plug I have, and I will set it on that inner race. Enough heat will transfer into that inner race and it will expand to allow easy assembly over that crank. I like to use Hylamar Blue for the gasket surface. There's a lot of different options you can use. 3-Bond 1184 is a great product for this also. Because we want to have adequate heat transfer from our plug to our bearing, I'm going to heat this up, set it on our bearing inner race, and then I will apply the joining compound. We're going to let that heat soak, and I'm going to install some sealant. Sealant doesn't need to be 1/8 of an inch thick on these cases. A good solid layer will create a nice seal. I do prefer to put sealant all the way up to the front of the case here. It seems silly. I get a lot of flack sometimes for that, but you're going to be happy when you leave this thing out in the rain and it does not fill up with moisture. Now that an adequate amount of time has passed, we know we've got a good amount of heat transfer into that inner race. I'm going to remove the plug, and now I'm going to drop the case half on. As I lower it, I'm going to rotate the intake cam to ensure alignment of the breather disc. As this drops together, you want to rotate your intake cam because of the breather disc tangs need to be aligned with the end of the cam. Once you know the case halves are fully seated and together and the cam still rotates, you know you have proper engagement. And any binding or anything would be due to a misalignment of cam bushings, so be sure to verify everything is nice and free as soon as you get the case halves together. As you can see, our crank is nice and free and rotates. I'm going to install case hardware and get things pulled together and tight. We now have our protective hose over connecting rods. I've got the hardware here in the middle, and now we're going to take care of all the rest of the hardware. We have our 3 bolts along the top and then our studs along the bottom. So I'm going to get those put in.
For more high-power engine builds like this one, you can find Engine Power on Power.
We're ready to move on to the transmission. This is considered one of the trickier components of a Unit 650, but I'm going to show you that it's not that crazy. What they call timing of a transmission is pretty simple, and you guys can do it very easily, and I'll show you how. After you have thoroughly cleaned and inspected all of your gears and made sure there was no damage, no issues, no missing teeth, or no major wear, I like to have everything I need laid out so that way once I begin I don't have any interruption and we don't forget any steps or stages. Obviously our first step was putting in 4th gear, but since that's already done, this to me is one of the most important components because you can get yourself in trouble for getting this. You have to disassemble the entire transmission just because this thrust washer was an afterthought. So I like to install this right away before we do anything else. The best way to do that is either apply some grease, or I like to use a sticky assembly lube, something to hold it nicely against that back face. Once that's installed, now we're going to put in our cam plate. This cam plate is in very good shape. It has some miles on it, but it is completely usable. I usually get to reuse these. Not very often do they need replaced. If there is a very excessive groove running down this face, then you may consider replacing it. We're going to put some assembly lube here on the spindle and install it in the cases, and making sure it's nice and free and there's no debris. If you sent your cases out for vapor hone, A lot of times, a lot of media will get trapped down in there, so please verify that that is not full. With our cam plate in position like so, I assemble transmissions with the cam plate in this position. To aid in keeping the cam plate locked in, I'm going to install the plunger. To do that, I like to pull the cam plate out. We've got our new spring, our plunger. We're going to lubricate this up. I'm going to verify that this is free and not binding or have any grit or anything in it. It's clean and clear. I do prefer to seal the threads on these just to be preventative from any leaks or issues. I'm going to install a little bit of blue Hylamar to the threads. Now that the plunger housing is fully seated, I'm going to depress the plunger and then I will push the cam plate back in place. Now that we have that, it will aid in holding the cam plate in place under tension, and it shouldn't jump as we are assembling the transmission. At this point, we are ready to install our lay shaft. I'm going to put some assembly lube on the end of the lay shaft that lives inside the needle bearing. I also like to put some assembly lube on the actual gears themselves. All right. Next, we are ready for some shift forks. If you look at the profile of your shift forks, one is larger than the other. The larger shift fork is for the lay shaft and the smaller shift fork is for the main shaft. Do not forget your rollers. Some models, these are pinned on, some they are loose. If you want to add some assembly lube, that does aid in keeping the roller stuck on. Taking our lay shaft shift fork and installing it on the two lay shaft gears, you can then slide them into place and everything should rest nicely in place. Next, we are going to take our two gears off of main shaft, lubricate the shift fork grooves, and our gears are going to face with the dogs going inward, and our shift fork is going to ride on top like so. Again, I'm going to put some lube on this nipple for the roller. I'm going to take my assembly, I'm going to lay it kind of across the back of the transmission, the gearbox, and then roll forward, locating the shift fork in the groove of the cam plate. I would like to take the shift fork spindle and we will lubricate this and install it through the ends of the shift forks. Sometimes you do need to reach in and lift up on the main shaft shift fork. Sometimes these can be a little tricky and it does take a little bit of twisting and shifting around for everything to kind of line up. Once you know that your spindle is fully home, you can now install your main shaft. Again, you want to lubricate it well. And our last gear can be installed. When fitting the inner transmission cover, you have a gasket option. These originally didn't come with a gasket. I like a gasket because I like a little bit extra insurance when sending these however far away. Most of the engines I build leave and go far enough away that I don't want to have to worry about them. So I choose to run the gasket. I also like to run a gasket compound. In this case it will be 3 bond 1211. With our gasket installed and a thin layer of 3 bond, I am ready to install the inner transmission cover. Just like the inside on our lay shaft, it is really critical to install the thrust washer. Now that we have that located, everything looks nice and clean and prepped. We've got both of our hollow dowels installed, so we can start pushing on our cover. Sometimes main shaft is a little tight in its ball bearing, so keep that in mind when pressing this on. This one's going to go nicely for us. You want to get to where you have about 1/4 of an inch away from contact, and when you know you're close, you're going to hold your quadrant. But we're going to get a little bit closer here. I'm going to do a little bump in. Okay. Once you reach about 1/4 of an inch away from contact, you're going to want to start holding your quadrant in place. If you draw a center line between the end of your main shaft and the shift spindle bushing, you should line up perfectly like so. Once you know you're in place, we are now going to finish bumping the cover on. Okay, so I'm still not quite seated, but I can feel my gears are meshing nicely. I know I'm in between. I don't have 2 ends bumping up against each other. We should land perfectly. Now I can install my 3 pieces of hardware and draw my cover home. Once you've got all your hardware in, it's now a good time to pull your main shaft all the way to the right side, which will give you the proper alignment for your gears, and you can verify everything is still free. At this point, I do recommend checking to see if you have all 4 gears. The easiest way to do this is gently prying up and down on your quadrant while spinning your sprocket. Do not get carried away. If it doesn't want to go, just kind of shimmy things around, and eventually it should want to engage into the next gear, and you can go back up and through. The other thing you could do is, if you have your outer cover assembled, you can slip it over and work it through the gears and verify that everything's there. If you find yourself only having 1 gear, or if it goes from neutral to 1 gear and then gets stuck, you got your timing off, it's a good idea to pull it apart, try again, but it's best to verify that now instead of waiting till later. If you have your main shaft all the way to the primary side too prematurely, it will cause misalignment of your gears, and you will also have false shifting. So pull that main shaft all the way over, and now you can go ahead and install your kickstart ratchet. Now that we verified we had gears and we actually left it engaged in gear, we can now utilize the final drive sprocket to hold our main shaft in place while we install the kickstart ratchet. The kickstart ratchet needs to be inspected. If you plan on reusing it, make sure your gears have a lot of life left in them, because if these get too worn out, you'll experience gear misalignment between your kickstart and the ratchet. If you've ever had binding or locking or slipping even, it could be because of worn kickstart components. First thing that you will put on is your thrust washer. Following, I like to do the sleeve, then the spring. Inspect your spring, make sure it's got a lot of life left in it. A lot of these components have been recently replaced. Then your inner gear and your outer gear. Make sure it's seated, and the Franz and Grubb transmission kit does come with a new tab washer, so make sure to use that. Using your vice grips, you can grab onto the sprocket, and then that will allow you to get a proper tension on the nut. And lastly, we will bend our tab washer over. We're going to take a break from the transmission. We'll put the outer cover on later. We're going to jump over here into our timing chest. We can get our idler gear in, our pinion gear, and our oil pump all installed, and then maybe we'll move on to the cylinder. We have a brand new Morgo pump, and I always recommend to disassemble these and inspect them. Most times there's nothing to be found, but it's always a good idea, even if something is brand new, to inspect it. So I've got it broke down, I'm checking, making sure everything looks clean. All the finish on these are always very nice, but in case there's something left behind, any debris or anything that maybe got missed in manufacturing, you can catch it now instead of blowing up your engine. You can clean all this up, put in new assembly lube, and put it all back together. Make sure it kind of snaps these ball valves. When you push these plungers up and down, you should get a nice pop, nice snap from the pressure being released by the ball and spring. So I'm going to put this back together with some pen grade, and we will go ahead and verify it. Although this engine is quite fun and has a few upgrades here and there, there's really nothing too crazy going on with the cams. We can just stick with the stock timing. Unlike the cam gears, the pinion for the crank does not have a special tool for installing. So a suitable drift, something hollow that you can safely run the gear on, is adequate. We are going to check to see the fitment of our key without disturbing its position. Get that gear kind of started, and then nice and square you can drive it on. Again, you can hear the change in the note of the hammer when you're fully seated. Because these cams aren't really anything special, they're 3134, so we know it's a good cam, but it's not anything that's going to require any special degreeing, so we can use these stock timing marks. I do like to take a marker and mark out my timing just to verify that I set it and there's no confusion later on during the build. Now that we're set, after we rotate the engine, we will lose this timing. It will not line up again until 90 some revolutions. Another special tool you can have is essentially just a pinion. This is a solid pinion because it's dedicated just for this, but you could buy another one or steal one off of another project engine, and if you place it up above, that will lock your gears and allow you to do a proper torquing of all of your nuts. The two cam nuts are both left-hand thread. And the crank nut is standard right-hand thread. When installing your oil pump gasket, there is no need to put any type of gasket sealant on it. So make sure you only install that dry. Some people do discuss using grease, but I prefer just using the dry gasket. Careful not to tear it, and make sure you have it on correctly to not block any passages. Next thing you want to make sure is that your drive is well lubricated along with the block, so there's no friction on startup. We already verified that there is plenty of lubricant inside of the pump, so now we can slide it on. We'll now install the 2 serrated washers and the nuts. These nuts do need to be torqued to 5 foot-pounds. Moving on to the top end, we were able to source a really nice Chantlin big bore kit. These are pretty easy to find. They do usually need some service. This one actually did need to be bored what would be technically 10 over for the 750 big bore. I was able to find a nice set of pistons, and we fitted them with Hepalite rings. Another cool feature was these Kibble White bronze tappet blocks. I think this is a very, very nice setup. The last thing I need to do before installing these is I need to wipe the bore down with some engine oil. Make sure there's nothing left from the bore and hone or any dust from it sitting around. You want to wipe until the oil comes out completely clean. So we need to continue on this one because, as you can see, we're still getting debris out of the hone. Now that we're coming back clean, we know we've got all the debris out. Something else that's a great upgrade is the luxury gasket from Franz & Grubb. I'm using the pre-unit one because this is a non-oiling cylinder, so it does not have the provision for the oiler. These are really nice gaskets. They do not require any sealant. They are reusable. It's an aluminum core with a foam backing. These are really reliable, great upgrade. I highly recommend them. Now, with our pistons properly fitted, our rings have been spaced, and we've got the ring compressors installed, we can now drop the cylinders on. I checked fitment of the cam followers, lubricated everything, and I am ready to drop them on. I have the cam followers held in with a zip tie, and that way we don't have to try and fish them out of the bottom of the engine. Once you get your cylinders on top and lined up, be sure they're centered in the bores as the wrist pins are floating. Go ahead and apply a little bit of gentle pressure. It may require just a little bit of tapping. If you have to use more than the heel of your hand, then you need to stop and find out what is wrong. A little bit further and we should be past all the rings. All right, that went pretty smoothly. So now we can go ahead and remove our ring compressors, and we will start sliding the cylinders down further. Now, supporting the bottom of the pistons, I like to lift up, pull my supports out, and fish the compressors. At this point, I like to stop and double check to make sure I have enough room between the bottom fin and the stud to install the cylinder base nuts. I'm using a 12-point fastener on these, and so we should have adequate room. Yes, we have more than enough. So I'm going to go ahead and final. After your cylinder is seated, I like to go around and hand tighten all the base nuts. Once we've gone through that, it's time to torque them. You have two options. I have a specific style crow's foot that fits very nicely in there. I did need to clearance it. This is the only use I have for this tool is these base nuts, so it works out really well. Otherwise, you can buy a torque adapter. This allows you to use a box-end wrench at 90 degrees to your torque wrench, which will maintain the exact torque value that you need. So as long as you stay at a 90-degree orientation, you will maintain your torque needed. This one's from Motion Pro, and it allows me to hold another modified box-end wrench that will fit around the 12-point nut and clearance the cylinders. Same goes for this crow's foot. As long as I maintain a 90-degree angle, I will keep the exact torque value needed. I like to go around doing inside-out pattern, start with half of the torque value, and then go back and torque it again. We're now ready to move on to the head. As you can see, it's all ready to be dropped on. This head was fitted with Kibble White compression relief valves and also a very nice beehive spring kit. The black diamond valve and the C630 bronze guide is going to last a very long time with this head, and it also has a 3-angle face. This head's in really good condition and it's ready to drop on. Something that requires a little bit of patience when it comes to a Triumph Twin are pushrod tubes. Pushrod tubes are sealed at the top and bottom, some requiring O-rings on the inside, sometimes just from the top and bottom, but you need to find the right combination for your assembly. Because we're running an aftermarket set of cylinders, aftermarket tappet blocks, and a 66 head, we need to know exactly what is the right combination for us. The best way I can explain this would be enough squish to seal, but not so much that you're going to spit your seal out. I'll show you with this one. This may not be the exact combination for you though. I previously had checked the fitment of the pushrod tube to the head. It's very narrow, so we know we aren't going to be utilizing the thicker seals. Because this cylinder is utilizing studs, we're going to try not to have to install and remove the head too many times. Now, because this bottom seal isn't captive inside the pushrod tube, I'm going to put the wedding band 711707. This will help hold the outward pressure of the seal when the pushrod tube is compressed. Head bolts have not been completely torqued, but they are fully seated. Everything is stacked, and as you can see, there is a perfect amount of squish on that top O-ring. You can't see the bottom one, but with our wedding band in place, we know it is pressed out against it nice and tight. So when you are completely finished with this, we should not experience any more squish after the rocker boxes get on and the head bolts are finally torqued. To finish out the top end, we'll talk about rocker box. The rocker boxes are clean and ready to be assembled. All the rockers themselves have been inspected. Everything is in great shape. One upgrade I'd like to make is we'll be installing these mushroom adjusters. They have a much better profile for contacting the valve stem and decrease a lot of that harsh engagement that the smaller, narrower. One other major upgrade we'll be doing is using more of Dan's luxury gaskets. These are foam-backed, aluminum core, reusable gaskets that do not require any sealer. They also have a much better profile and fit to the actual gasket surface. The rocker boxes cannot be installed until the engine is put into the frame, so we're going to hold off on this. We're going to move back to the bottom end and finish up the right side of the engine. Now that we have all the final components installed in our outer transmission cover, we can go ahead and install it on the engine. A thin layer of 3-bond is applied, followed by our gasket. With the kickstart ratchet spring preloaded, we can then slide our case our outer cover into place. Now that we're finished up with this outer transmission cover, we can move on to the timing cover. We already have both of our oil seals installed, keeping in mind the direction of the spring. Similar to our last gasket surface, we're going to put on a thin layer of rebond and follow it up with the paper gasket. We have our point seal installation tool installed and a light film of sealant on our gasket surface. We're ready to install that. Now we can install our hardware. One last detail we installed here on the right side is our oil junction block. Using a later style oil junction block doesn't really add any benefits, but it does look kind of neat because of our cutaway on the side here. With the fourth gear nut torqued, we can now bend our tab washer over. I like to pull up a couple corners and use a set of channel locks to bring it home. We're now ready to assemble this primary side. We're going to start with the sprocket window and work our way out. With this being a dry primary, there's no need for 3-bond on any of these paper gaskets because we're not going to have any oil. I am going to run the gasket to keep any chain wax or grease from coming in. With our key installed, we can now take the primary assembly, this one being a belt drive from MAP, and locating both the crank splines and the main shaft key, we can press it in place. We'll now tighten down the clutch center nut. Utilizing our special tool to hold everything in place, we can now torque it to 50 foot-pounds. We can now take our dry clutch pack and install it. The outer pressure plate with the new Barnett springs can also now be installed. As you can see, there's quite a few things left, but that's all we have time for today. We're waiting on a few parts, but as soon as everything comes in, we'll get this engine back in the frame, get it broke in, get some test miles on it. Alright guys, that was something a little bit different. Me and Mike, the guy who owns this, had talked about doing kind of like a engine power, like Power Nation engine power kind of inspired video. It was fun. It was something different, which I enjoyed. But I can't keep that up. That was really hard for me. So if I sound like an idiot, it's all in good fun. You know, I skipped around so much. I skipped a lot. I kind of tried to keep the same like cadence and stuff that they do, where it's more of just like either telling you what they just did or what they're about to do, or kind of just skipping over the nuances of stuff. And so it was just fun. But this engine's really cool. I'm excited about it. It's fun. Me and Mike are really good friends, and so that's why I'm going to be putting it back in the frame for him and putting test miles on. I don't normally do that kind of thing, but this is special just because he's a buddy. And so we are waiting on a Joe Hunt and a few other little things, and then I'll be able to kind of get it back in the frame. It's getting close to the end of the riding season here, so I'll have plenty of time to still get it back together and then get some miles on it. But I do want to hurry up and get to that. So you'll probably see that here pretty soon. But yeah, I'm gonna actually go over everything, make sure I did everything the way I like. But I hope you enjoyed it. It was fun. I probably won't be doing another one like this. But I'm gonna have a lot of editing to do because I stumbled a lot. So hopefully it turns out. But thanks for watching. But I've already taken care of everything on that end, and god damn it, that doesn't fucking make any sense.